The distant hum of the subway echoed through the dark, damp tunnels beneath the city, a constant reminder of the tower's downfall, forced by the King's Court to retreat to the outskirts of Dreadford and take refuge in the sewers like rats. Most vampires had grown weary of hiding. They longed for a fight, held back only by their former leadership. Since the High Priestess assumed control, however, the preparation for war had been relentless, like a storm gathering strength. On this Christmas Eve, Antoinette and Akasha shared their anguish in the quiet shadows.
I don't understand why you care so much about this.
Because he's my big brother. I don't know. We used to be closer, but ever since what Victoria did to him, he was never the same. Never trusted anyone again.
You don't trust anyone either. Always sulking around the shadows with your secrets.
That's different.
How?
Because it's me! Besides, we can't see Mom anymore, so all I have is him and Jolene.
Why don't you go see her if you miss it so much?
Have you seen her? She's crazy!
Takes one to know one.
Before Akasha could retort, a knock on the door interrupted them. Oppenheimer stepped in, a mischievous grin on his face.
Hey, ladies. May I interrupt?
Go away, Oppie.
Akasha said, barely looking up.
You better leave.
Antoinette stood up and pushed him out.
I want to talk to my sister. Alone.
Listen, punk. You can pull that serial killer posture with the bloodlings around here, but not with me. I'll dump your ashes in a cat litter without a second thought.
They stared off in silence.
Don't worry, Nettie. Let him in. I'll catch you later, okay?
Antoinette gave her a look and Akasha nodded.
Consider this your lucky day, punk.
Antoinette said as she left, closing the door behind her.
She's full of herself these days, ain't she?
If your blood was as thick as hers after only 10 years walking, you would be too.
You're damn right I would.
So what do you want?
Well, since you so kindly asked with that knife to my face to join my plan, I thought I'd let you in on my next move.
Oh, now you want my help. What went wrong with your genius plan?
Nothing went wrong. Perfectly calculated.
Potato, potato.
Oppenheimer winced in anger but tried to remain calm and friendly.
Will you help me? Jolene is coming too.
Ah, no. She's a pain.
It'll be like old times. Come on.
Thank you. Bye.
Oppenheimer growled and stood up.
Well, don't you want to know where we're going?
She shrugged.
We are gonna make a prison break at the dead man's prison.
That caught Akasha's full attention.
You're a liar. No one knows where it is.
Oh, what I do. As I said, my plan was perfectly calculated. So, can I interest you in some explosive fun?
A grin spread across Akasha's face, but then she narrowed her eyes, a flicker of suspicion.
Why tonight, though?
Oppenheimer's expression darkened with mischievous delight.
Because it's Christmas Eve. Who in their right mind in the King's Court would expect something like that tonight? They're probably having a party or something.
Akasha's grin widened, mirroring his.
You're insane.
Exactly.
As they made their way through the subway tunnels, the tension in the air was replaced by a sense of shared purpose. When they reached Jolene, she was leaning casually against a wall, hands in her pockets.
So you convinced little Miss Pandemonium? Good for you.
Yes, we're going on a family trip, little sisters.
Awesome.
Could you be any more boring? I think you can do better.
Akasha teased, making Jolene raise an eyebrow.
It seems we have a family feud here. This might be entertaining.
Pagliacci, what are you doing here?
We are in town on tour. I'm just passing by to announce myself and my crew to the High Priestess.
I am sorry, but this is a show I'll have to miss.
Well, it's a pity. You should join us. You would make a terrific clown.
I hate clowns.
Then why do you dress like one?
I may look like a clown, but I always have the last laugh, while you make people laugh at you for a living.
Nice comeback. Did Morgan teach you that?
Oppenheimer, Akasha and Jolene glared at the clown as his laughter grew louder.
Pagliacci. She will see you now.
The clown sauntered off in the direction of the room with the huge mirror, still laughing. Elsa approached Akasha, her demeanor cold and standoffish.
I see what you're doing with my grandchild, Akasha, and I don't care for it. You should rethink your strategy before I decide to intervene in your affairs.
I do not care for you meddling in my business, Elsa. Intelligence affairs are my business. If you have any complaints, talk to the preacher. My department doesn't do customer service.
Stop leading him into danger. You've been warned.
Without waiting for a response, the businesswoman turned and left.
Whoa, a lot of tension here today. Anyways, I got permission for us to use the Flying Dutchman. The High Priestess has agreed. It is being prepared in the garden. We should go.
Christmas is here, bringing good cheer to young and old, meek and the bold. Ding dong, with joyful ring, all caroling.
Maybe we'll get the chance to carol after we blow up the prison.
Or we could just blow it up to Jingle Bells.
The siblings exchanged grins, the weight of the mission momentarily lightened by the absurdity of their situation. Christmas night was about to get a lot more interesting. As they prepared for the dangerous task ahead, each of them focused on their own ritual of readiness. Oppenheimer worked meticulously, his hands steady as he assembled several explosives. The tools of his trade, wires, detonators, and a variety of chemicals were laid out in front of him like a surgeon's instruments. He handled each component with the utmost care, ensuring that every device was perfectly calibrated. His face held a rare intensity as he double-checked his work, his mind already calculating the best ways to make use of these little packages of destruction. Akasha, on the other hand, preferred a more personal approach to her preparations. She spread out an array of knives, each one gleaming wickedly under the dim light. Her fingers danced over the blades, selecting the ones she would carry, each knife chosen for a specific purpose, destined to serve her in a moment of need. With practiced ease, she began hiding them on her person, tucking them into boots, sliding them into hidden sheaths and securing them under her sleeves. Satisfied, she pulled out a well-worn deck of tarot cards, shuffling them with a flick of her wrist. The cards were a source of comfort and power, a connection to the future and her ability to read it, something she often relied on. She stuffed the deck into a concealed pocket, a secret weapon of a different kind. Jolene's preparation was more chaotic, yet no less effective. She rummaged through a bag filled with an assortment of oddities, trinkets and tools, each one with a story and a use only she truly understood. Her bag was a Pandora's box of possibilities, filled with gadgets and gizmos that could get them out of any number of tight spots. She carefully selected the items she'd need, from lock-picking tools to small mechanical devices that could be used for distractions or sabotage. Her hands moved quickly, grabbing what she needed and stashing it away, her mind racing with potential scenarios and the solutions she might need to pull from her bag. With their preparations complete, the three siblings reconvened at the far north of Dreadford's National Forest, near Lake Dreadford. They moved, taking great care not to draw the attention of the King's Court or any other unwelcome eyes. As they approached the old stone bridge, they were met by four men, each eerily identical, appearing as strong 30-year-old men with cold, lifeless eyes. Even after all this time, the Morrigans were not accustomed to the High Priestess's unsettling servants.
The Flying Dutchman is a vessel of the Shadowlands, a realm of ghosts and lost souls. You must navigate it carefully or risk being lost forever. Be prepared. The moment you step aboard, you'll be in the waters of the Valley of Shadow and Death.
The four spoke at the same time, their voices intertwined perfectly, while one of the strange men guided them under the bridge. As they followed, a swift disorientation overtook them, a sensation like slipping between the cracks of reality. Mist closed in around them, bringing with it a biting chill, and they knew they had crossed the threshold into another world. The other three men trailed them silently, their presence only adding to the creepy atmosphere.
You are not exactly filling us with confidence here.
Don't worry, the ship is needed for us to reach the prison without anyone noticing.
So you really know the location of the prison? The legendary pit where the King's Court sends their rejects? I can already see the ghost of Christmas past waiting to give us the grand tour. Maybe we'll get a festive little haunting. Fa la 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 la, freaky!
The servant barely acknowledged the joke.
An anathema is required to guide the ship through the Shadowlands. Mother has prepared one to accompany you. He is waiting aboard.
As they approached, the Flying Dutchman loomed out of the mist like a spectre, a ship born from nightmares. Its sails were torn and frayed, yet it moved smoothly over the black water, propelled by some unseen force. The ship's wood groaned under the weight of countless years, each creak a reminder of the souls who had suffered upon its cursed decks. Ghostly figures whispered in the fog, their forms barely visible before dissolving into the shadows. The three Morrigans boarded the ship, its ancient timbers cold and unwelcoming beneath their feet. The stench of decay and the despair of the trapped souls clung to the atmosphere like a shroud. As the ship prepared to depart, they caught a fleeting glimpse of the garden where the High Priestess resided. It was a place of unnatural beauty. Every flower, leaf and tree, a deep crimson, as if fashioned from blood itself. These otherworldly plants swayed gently. Their vibrant hue stood in stark contrast to their grim surroundings. With a sudden lurch, the Flying Dutchman set off, leaving the blood garden behind. The ship glided through the Shadowlands with an eerie grace, the sea around them transforming into an inky black void. Jolene stood at the ship's railing, her eyes narrowed as she peered into the abyss. She felt the presence of restless souls pressing against the hull, their mournful cries barely audible. She was sure something was peering back at her. The Shadowlands were alive with the dead, but death was nothing new to Jolene or her siblings. After all, they were Nosferatu.
Hey sis, you planning on making friends with the dead, or are you just sightseeing? We've got a plan to finalize, and I don't think the ghosts are gonna help us with it.
Just making sure we're the only ones on this ghost ship. But yeah, let's go inside. Oppenheimer's probably waiting with one of his brilliant ideas.
These bloodborns give me the chills. They're all identical, like they were carved from the same unsettling mold. I mean, what even are they?
They're creations of the High Priestess. Born directly from her garden, they've never been mortal and they've never received the gift of Babylon. They're born as they are, perfectly identical and quite devoted. They serve her in the garden, while the servants she sends to the outside are the anathemas. Nosferatu twisted by an old style rite that strips away any trace of their humanity and turns them into monsters. Each house becomes a different kind of anathema.
Well, that's not terrifying at all.
They stepped into a cabin where Oppenheimer was waiting.
Well, ladies, time to get ready for the main event.
The three siblings took their seats around a worn wooden table, the dim lantern light casting long shadows across their faces.
Our objective is the dead man's prison, the place where the King's Court hides away vampires and other beings they don't want destroyed, just forgotten. We're going there to rescue the 4 bloodlings who got caught after we took down Don Vittorio.
And how exactly did you find this so-called secret prison?
Oppenheimer's smile widened, a glint of something almost mischievous in his eyes.
2 of those bloodlings, Leon and Javier, they're my vampiric children. The court would love to interrogate them, and I knew I could follow their blood by the bond between sire and child straight back to the prison.
You allowed them to get caught on purpose.
Oppenheimer simply smiled, leaving the question hanging in the air like the ghostly mist that surrounded the Flying Dutchman. He leaned over the table, his fingers tracing a rough sketch of an island near the coast of Dreadford.
It's here, an old maximum security penitentiary for mortals, now long abandoned. The court has repurposed it, and beneath the ruins, in the underground tunnels from the 19th century, is where they've hidden their true prison. It's a labyrinth of traps, alarms, and shadows. The Warden is a Nosferatu of House Urkula, a creature as twisted and ancient as the prison itself, and he commands an army of wraiths.
Akasha and Jolene listened intently, their eyes narrowed as he continued.
The place is haunted not just by wraiths, but members of House Moroi act as jailers in the depths of the complex.
Jolene shivered slightly at the mention of wraiths, but Akasha seemed almost amused.
You've been busy, Oppie. You're never this forthcoming with information. What gives?
Once I pinpointed the location of the prison, I sought help from Beatrix Vanderhoven. She sent a wraith under her command to infiltrate it, posing as one of the Warden's own. With this little scouting mission, we managed to gather some intel.
He unfolded a hand-drawn sketch of several tunnels and chambers detailing the underground of the island. Akasha grinned, clearly pleased.
Well, this is a treat. It's not every day you hand us the keys to the castle. How about I see if the cards have anything to add?
She reached for a deck of tarot cards, the edges worn and familiar, carrying the weight of countless readings. With a flourish, she spread the deck across the table. The cards landed in a chaotic pattern that seemed random to the untrained eye, but held deep meaning for her. She closed her eyes for a moment, then began turning them over, one by one. Oppenheimer watched closely, a flicker of recognition in his eyes.
You do it just like her, don't you?
Don't mention it.
She muttered before focusing back on the cards. As she flipped a card, her eyes widened. It had the image of a carefree figure on the brink of a cliff, about to step off into the unknown.
The Fool.
This is our path. When we reach the underground, we'll come to a junction where all logic says to turn back. But we'll need to trust in the unknown and take that leap of faith. The Warden doesn't expect anyone to be reckless enough to use it. That's where we strike.
She pointed to one of the tunnels in the drawing. Akasha pointed to another card, the Nine of Swords. The image of a figure sitting upright in bed, hands covering his face, surrounded by 9 swords hanging over him.
The Nine of Swords. Fear. Nightmares. We'll be walking into a place that preys on our worst fears, our deepest regrets. But this card also means that the worst is often in our minds. If we can face our fears, we'll find a way through.
She pointed to the next card, the Three of Pentacles. 3 figures were working together to build something, their efforts combining into a single structure.
Collaboration. This isn't a task we can accomplish alone. We'll need to rely on each other, on all our strengths to make it to the end.
Then she took the 5 of Wands, showing a group of figures locked in combat, their staffs clashing.
Conflict. We're gonna face resistance, perhaps from within the prison, or even from the rats. It won't be straightforward, but we can use the chaos to our advantage. Find the cracks in their defense while they're distracted.
The card that followed was the 6 of Swords. It depicted a boatman steering a small vessel across the water, carrying passengers toward a distant shore.
Transition. This is our journey through the underground, a path that will take us from danger to safety. If we can navigate it wisely, we'll need to keep moving, never linger too long in one place.
She flipped the Hanged Man, depicting a figure suspended upside down.
Sacrifice. We'll need to make a difficult choice. Give something up to proceed. This isn't going to be a clean operation.
Next was the 7 of Cups, showing a figure overwhelmed by 7 cups, each holding a different tempting vision.
Illusion. We'll encounter something that's not what it seems. A deception. But we must stay focused on our goal, not get distracted by what looks appealing but isn't real.
And last was the Devil. The image of a horned figure loomed over the card, its presence ominous.
Temptation. Binding. We'll face something dark, something that will try to hold us back, keep us trapped. We need to be wary of anything that seems too easy. There's always a cost.
Akasha gathered the cards back up. Jolene nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities.
We'll have to move fast then. Exploit that weakness before they realize we've found it. Let's hope the Warden's as arrogant as his old.
Oppenheimer folded the map and stood, his smile returning.
Then it's settled. We strike through the Fool's Path.
The siblings exchanged glances, the tension of the mission balanced by the thrill of the hunt. This would be no ordinary rescue, but they had the intel they needed. Now all that was left was to execute their plan, face the horrors of the prison, and hope the cards had read true. The Dutchman emerged from the mists, slipping into the material realm with a ghostly grace. The ancient ship's tattered sails flapped gently in the wind as it cut through the dark waters, the island looming ahead. Against the starless sky, the crumbling structures of the once imposing prison stood silent and foreboding. Midnight cast an eerie stillness over the island. broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the hull as the ship neared the shore. In the ship's shadowy depths, Jolene could hear the mournful cries of unseen wraiths. She could sense them, the restless spirits tethered to the island, their sorrowful energies pulsing faintly. Immediately, she weaved a powerful illusion to conceal the ship now that it was back into the material world. Heavy footsteps echoed behind her. Jolene turned to see a towering wolfman emerge from the shadows. His hulking form was a blend of man and beast, muscles rippling beneath a pelt of midnight black fur. His eyes glowed faintly as he gazed down at her.
We're about to land.
Thank you, Abaddon. Stay with the ship. We'll need you to be ready for escape.
I'll be here, little crow.
As the ship glided into a hidden cove, its keel scraping gently against the rocky shore, the siblings checked their gear one last time. They disembarked in silence. Their boots sank into the damp sand as they moved swiftly into the cover of the island's jagged rocks. Above them, the prison loomed like a dark fortress of stone and shadows. Jolene paused, her senses stretching out into the darkness. The ghosts were there as she expected, their spectral forms drifting among the ruins like pale memories. She could feel their cold, lingering presence, their sorrow and anger, the emotions of lives long lost. They were bound to the Warden's will, patrolling the desolate landscape in a ceaseless, mournful vigil.
We'll stick to the shadows. There are fewer ghosts along the western side. I can guide us through, but we'll need to move quickly and stay silent.
Lead the way, Jolene.
With a final glance at the Dutchman, now hidden in the misty cove, the siblings began their approach. Jolene summoned her power, weaving an illusion around them to make them nearly invisible against the rocky terrain. They moved as one, slipping through the ruins like phantoms. Their journey was tense, the air thick with the presence of the restless dead. Jolene's heart would be pounding if she was still alive. But her instincts held true, and she guided them, avoiding the concentrations of ghosts that clustered near. The ghosts of the island were everywhere, pale specters drifting through the ruins, their hollow eyes sometimes fixed on the vampires with a cold, unwavering stare, before moving on. They scaled crumbling walls and slipped through narrow gaps in silence. Finally, they reached the entrance to the prison, a massive archway of ancient stone that loomed above them like the maw of some great slumbering beast. The stone was blackened, scorched by time and weather, and covered in a thick layer of moss. The darkness beyond the entrance was impenetrable. The air was thick with the scent of decay and damp earth, a cloying smell that clung to their senses.
This is it. No turning back now.
Good work, Jolene. Let's finish this.
The silence was oppressive, the kind that suffocates and crushes the spirit. She turned to her siblings, her eyes meeting theirs in the dim light. Oppenheimer's eyes gleamed with determination, his hand reassuring on her shoulder. They stepped into the darkness, the shadows closing around them. Oppenheimer took the lead. Each step was cautious, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Jolene stayed close behind, her senses attuned to the ghostly whispers that permeated the air. Akasha brought up the rear, her eyes glowing faintly as she relied on her divination. Finally, they reached a vast chamber. The ceiling stretched high above them, disappearing into the inky blackness, and the walls were lined with the remains of ancient cells. Rusted iron bars jutted out, and the floor was littered with debris, shattered stones, broken bones, and the tattered remnants of prisoners long forgotten.
This place reeks of death.
Oppenheimer nodded, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the task ahead.
We have to find the watchtower. That's where the Warden's eyes are. From there, he can project his senses to the whole island.
It didn't take long to find the crumbling structure. The watchtower stood tall and menacing, its ancient stones blackened and cracked. Faint glimmers of light flickered from the windows at the top. The three Morrigans ascended the stairs, only to be confronted by a bizarre and intricate contraption, a fusion of ancient sorcery and technology. A large glowing sphere crowned its top, swirling with energy that resembled a living nebula. Tendrils of black, cable-like conduits extended from the sphere, snaking outward and embedding themselves into the walls and ceiling, as if the device had dominion over the entire space. The base of the device was a towering cylindrical structure, adorned with intricate glyphs and runes etched deeply into metal panels. Around the base, glowing green fluids pulsed with energy, amplifying its power. Suspended around the device were floating metallic discs, orbiting the apparatus in a slow, graceful dance. These discs shimmered with strange, gravitational properties, defying natural law. This was the focal point of the Warden's surveillance, the device through which his senses could project across the entire island, allowing him to see, hear, and feel everything within his domain.
We have to take this down. If we don't, the Warden will know the moment we go underground. We could blow it up!
Oppenheimer's hand instinctively went to the explosive strapped to his belt. Jolene shook her head.
No, we need to do this carefully. It's partially mystical. We need to understand what we're dealing with before we act. I can't take it apart.
Oppenheimer frowned but nodded in agreement.
All right. Jolene, you're up.
Jolene stepped forward and studied the intricate contraption before her. She could feel the pulse of the apparatus, its rhythm almost like a heartbeat, syncing with the malevolent energy that filled the air. This was no ordinary device. It was alive, in a way connected to the island. To the Warden, she worked with precision, her hands already probing the enchanted contraptions, her fingers deftly manipulating the arcane mechanisms that powered the Warden's surveillance. Her sharp mind pieced together its function as she probed for weak points. She reached into her bag, retrieving a set of delicate picks and probes. She always came prepared. She inserted a thin, needle-like probe into a seam between two metal plates, carefully prying them apart without triggering the protective wards etched into the metal. She studied the shifting glow of the central crystal, carefully observing the sequence of colors and the rhythm of the pulsing light. She realized it was a pattern that governed the flow of energy within the apparatus. Jolene smiled to herself, a challenge but nothing she couldn't handle. Suddenly, Akasha tensed.
He's noticed something. We should move faster.
Before they could react, a low, guttural hiss echoed through the watchtower. Oppenheimer didn't hesitate. Drawing a knife from his belt, he stepped toward the entrance.
Jolene, finish this. Akasha, you're with me.
As soon as they exited the watchtower, a monstrous figure emerged from the shadows. A Nosferatu with a twisted form, part man, part spider. Its limbs were elongated and spindly, covered in bristling hairs, and its eyes gleamed with a predatory hunger. It moved with unnatural speed, lunging at Oppenheimer. He barely had time to raise his arms before the creature was upon him, its clawed limbs slashing at him with deadly precision. He blocked the initial strikes, his muscles straining as he held the creature at bay, but it was relentless, its attacks coming faster and faster. The chamber erupted into chaos, the sound of their struggle filling the air. Akasha darted to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's snapping mandibles. As she moved, several prison guards, drawn by the commotion, rushed into the chamber, weapons drawn. They brandished a mix of ancient swords and modern firearms, their eyes glinted with malice. With a fluid motion, Akasha drew her hidden knives, her body moving with inhuman speed as she danced through the oncoming assault. Her blades flashed as she deflected strikes and countered with lethal precision. Gunshots rang out, bullets tearing through the air, but Akasha moved like a shadow, her agility allowing her to evade the deadly projectiles with ease. She weaved between the guards, and as they realized their shots were hitting their own, they ceased fire and closed in for melee combat.
Intruders near the Warden's eyes. Send backup. I repeat, send backup.
Oppenheimer grunted as the grotesque vampire slammed him against a wall, its claws digging into his flesh. Laughing in defiance, he grabbed one of the creature's legs and twisted with all his strength. The sickening snap of bone echoed through the chamber as the limb broke, and the creature let out a screech of pain. It lashed out with its other limbs, its eyes glowing with fury. Jolene, still focused on the sabotage, worked frantically as the battle raged. Her hands moved swiftly as she bypassed security rooms with a series of precise cuts and adjustments. She inserted another tool into a crackling junction of wires, redirecting the flow of energy. The green glowing accents on the device sputtered and sparked as she systematically disabled its energy conduits. The floating metallic discs that hovered around the apparatus trembled, their gravitational fields destabilizing, the Warden's surveillance system gradually losing its grip on the island. Akasha spun, her knives slashing through the air as she took down another guard. The ground around her was littered with bodies, yet more kept coming, their eyes burning with fanaticism. They struck at her from all angles and she deflected and dodged with acrobatic grace. It was as if she anticipated the attacks before they even began. The thirst crept at the edges of her mind, but she pushed it aside, her focus razor sharp. Relenting wasn't an option, not now. Oppenheimer wrestled the monstrous vampire to the ground, grappling in the dirt as the creature's fangs snapped just inches from his face. Drawing on the cursed blood surging through him, he gripped the fangs at the ends of its chelicerae, one in each hand, and wrenched them apart with a sickening crunch. The creature tilted back, screaming in agony, exposing its chest. In a flash, Oppenheimer drew a knife and plunged it deep into the creature's clavicle, releasing a spray of black blood. As the monster tried to heal, he twisted the blade, making the wound even wider. The blood drained too fast for the creature to recover. It fell to the ground, limp and barely conscious. Its body twitched and curled in itself like a dying spider. Oppenheimer, blood dripping from his wounds, scanned the chamber. Akasha had dispatched the last of the guards, and she stood with a satisfied smile on her lips.
Jolene, how much longer?
Almost there. Just a little more.
Her fingers a blur as she made some adjustments. Jolene's focus was absolute. The Warden's oppressive presence weighed on her mind. She could feel the device fighting back, as if it were a living extension of his will. She pulled a vial from her bag and injected a neutralizing agent into the tubes. The liquid inside hissed and changed color, its energy diffusing into harmless vapor. Finally, Jolene reached the core of the apparatus. The crystal's light flickered weakly now, its glow dimming as the energy that powered it was carefully siphoned away. With a single decisive cut, she severed the last connection, a thin silvery wire that pulsed with a faint green light. The swirling energy inside it dissipated, and the entire device groaned as if it were an ancient beast breathing its last. The floating discs around it dropped to the floor with a dull clang, and the once radiant glow faded entirely, leaving the chamber in near darkness. She stepped back. The apparatus was neutralized.
Ha! It's done.
She left the watchtower and regrouped with her siblings. Oppenheimer nodded. With the Warden's eyes blinded, they had a chance. Jolene glanced at the grotesque, spider-like creature, her eyes widening in surprise, the cursed vampire coughing blood in his last moments.
So they really have Nosferatu from Hasmoroi here.
Akasha crouched beside one of the fallen guards, her fangs elongated as she prepared to sink them into the corpse's neck, desperate for the blood to replenish her strength. But before she could bite down, Jolene's sharp voice cut through the tension.
Akasha, don't!
Almost gotcha. It doesn't matter. You are all destroyed already. Your mission is doomed to fail, you goddamned ravens.
You know, a gathering of ravens is what you might call an unkindness, a treachery, a conspiracy. And that is all fine and dandy, but the crow, it remembers when it's slighted. It never forgets. Never. Even from the grave, they protect their own. When you slight one crow, you slight them all. Now you see, do you know what a gathering of crows is called?
The Morrigan said, as he approached the vampire, stepping on its legs, forcing them to budge and break underneath his weight. The creature winced in pain and coughed blood as Oppenheimer approached, revealing Akasha and Jolene behind him, and at his sides terror started to fill his eyes.
It's called a murder of crows.
Cobwebbed walls loomed over Leon as he lay strapped to a metal table. The dim light above him flickered sporadically, casting faint, shifting shadows over his emaciated frame. His wrists and ankles were bound in thick iron shackles that cut into his skin. The smell of old blood clung to the air, mingling with the scent of damp earth. It soaked into Leon's senses, an ever-present reminder of his deprivation. He was so thirsty. Across the room, standing motionless in the gloom, the brain warper waited. Tall and impossibly gaunt, his shallow skin stretched taut over his skull, his sunken eyes burned with a sickly glow. He approached Leon, his long, thin fingers gliding toward Leon's head with a slow, deliberate grace. The chill of his touch seeped into Leon's scalp, sending a tremor through his spine.
You speak eventually.
Leon grit his teeth, trying to brace himself. But it was pointless. He was nearly dry, his body ached, and his mind was clouded by the lack of blood. Without another word, the brain warper's psychic tendrils invaded his mind. The sensation was unbearable, like barbed wire threading through his thoughts, tearing apart his mental barriers. Leon convulsed, his muscles strained against the restraints. His mouth opened in a silent scream as the vampire's icy presence flooded his consciousness, pushing deeper and deeper. seeking the knowledge buried in his mind.
Tell me about the tower, its plans, its secrets, its leader. Who's the spy the tower has inside the king's court?
Leon could feel his memories being pried open, one by one, like the pages of a book being forcefully torn apart. He tried to hold on to something, but his mind was unraveling.
No, I won't.
The brain warper's grip tightened on his head, and the pain flared again. It felt as though claws were raking across his brain, peeling away layer after layer of thought.
Your resistance is pointless. You're too weak, too consumed by thirst. I almost feel thirsty just wandering through your thoughts.
He wasn't wrong. Leon's throat burned with a dry, desperate hunger. His veins felt like fire screaming for blood. This left him feeble and defenseless against the relentless assault. Still, he tried to lock his mind away from the invader. But the brain warper was already pulling pieces free, fragments of conversations, faces, names. Minor tower secrets surfaced in Leon's thoughts, and he cursed himself for it. He saw flashes of the tower's inner sanctum, vampires milling about, the pool of blood and the mirror.
There it is. Names. Oppenheimer. Jolene. Jacqueline. Luke. Unfinished Father. Hector. Minor plans, perhaps. But useful.
The brain warper's voice slithered through the pain, his pleasure at Leon's suffering palpable.
The Warden will be most pleased.
With a sudden wrenching force, the brain warper withdrew his tendrils from Leon's mind. The pain lingered, a dull throbbing ache that spread through Leon's skull, leaving his body trembling violently from the strain. The brain warper stepped back satisfied as he observed the broken vampire on the table.
You will tell me more soon enough. Take him back to his cell. He's finished for now.
As the guards approached, Leon could barely register their presence. His mind was a shattered mess, pieces of his thoughts scattered and blurred, slowly getting back together. He heard the clanking of chains echoing through the winding tunnels as he was dragged along by the guards. The thirst screamed at him, a constant reminder of how close he was to breaking. Around him, the stone walls of the tunnels glistened with dampness, overrun with webs that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The cobwebs stretched across the corridors like a net. Every so often, Leon would catch a glimpse of a spider scurrying across the webs, its small black body disappearing into the shadows. In the corners of the passage, massive egg sacs bulged, pulsating with the promise of something dark and deadly inside. The heavy iron door clanged shut behind Leon as the guards tossed him into the cell. He stumbled forward, barely catching himself on the rough stone floor. Leon's wrists throbbed where the shackles had dug into his skin. He saw Javier slumped in a corner with his knees drawn up to his chest, his hands gripping his head as if trying to hold it together.
Javier, you all right?
It's the headaches. They've been getting worse.
Since the fight with Corse?
Yeah. It wasn't so bad at first. I could manage, but now it's like my skull splitting apart.
He winced, gritting his teeth as another wave of pain hit him.
You should have said something earlier.
Weird, isn't it? Why are we in the same cell? They could have split us up. Should have, really.
It's intentional. They're watching us. We're being observed. Every conversation, every movement. They want to learn more about us. Maybe see how we work together and what we talk about. They're probably doing the same with Wade and Stephanie.
Javier furrowed his brow, then winced as the movement triggered another sharp pain.
But there aren't any cameras. I've checked 1,000 times. I always look for them, and there's nothing. No hidden lenses, no glimmers of light. Nothing.
Doesn't mean we're not being watched. Magic, psychic monitoring, maybe even the spiders.
Javier looked skeptical, but his headache was making it hard to focus. He grimaced, his hand clenching into a fist as the pain surged again.
We'll figure it out, but for now just hold on. We're not out of this yet.
Leon said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. He felt as helpless as ever. Javier let out a dry laugh, though it quickly turned into a groan as another wave of pain hit him.
Ow. Yeah, I'll try.
Leon glanced around the cell once more, feeling the oppressive weight of the prison bearing down on them. He couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching, waiting for them to break. Later, in another cell, the door creaked open, and Wade was shoved inside by the Moroi guards. His body was tense and his expression unreadable. The door slammed shut behind him, sealing him in with Stephanie. The guards were gone as quickly as they had appeared, leaving the two of them alone in the dimly lit cell. Stephanie was pacing, her boots scraping the rough stone floor as she moved back and forth in a constant nervous rhythm. Her eyes, though calm on the surface, betrayed a hint of fear. She stopped mid-step when Wade entered, her gaze locking onto him.
Wade, what did they ask you?
Wade stood silent for a moment, his back against the cold wall. His jaw was clenched, his eyes dark with something close to anger. Finally, he spoke.
They wanted to know about the tower, the leaders, the secrets, if we had any allies.
They stood in silence for a time, the oppressive atmosphere of the prison weighing down on them.
We have to hold on. They'll try to offer us deals, try to turn us against each other. We can't let that happen.
Wade looked away for a moment as if considering her words.
I know. My father taught me that. The people in the organization he worked for, they trusted him with the most compromising information. He never spoke. Not to the cops, not to anyone. Loyalty was everything.
Stephanie's gaze softened slightly, but there was a flicker of curiosity. She stepped closer.
You've mentioned your father before. It seems like he meant a lot to you.
Wade's eyes darkened, his mind flashing back to the fight with Tom.
Tom said something about my father during that fight. He said something about who killed him. I always knew it was Don Vittorio who gave the order to have him murdered, but now...
Wade spoke as if he was still piecing together something, and Stephanie frowned, her curiosity deepening.
What do you mean? What exactly did Tom say?
He asked me if I knew who landed the shiv. He was so certain it was like he knew the one who actually murdered my father was someone other than a goon.
He was trying to mess with your head.
Maybe, but it didn't feel like it.
Who was your father, Wade? You've mentioned him a few times, but I don't think you've ever told me his name.
Wade's jaw tightened, and for a moment he was silent. Then, in a quiet voice, as if speaking the name could summon the past, he said,
William Morning.
Stephanie's eyes widened, her entire body tensing at the mention of the name. For a moment she was completely still, her usual calm shattered by a wave of shock.
What is it?
Stephanie quickly looked away.
It's nothing, just the name caught me off guard.
Don't lie to me, Stephanie. You know something.
Stephanie's silence deepened, and she took a step back, ending the conversation. After his next interrogation, Leon was thrown into an isolated cell. His body slumped against the damp stone wall, too weak to stay standing. The relentless vampiric thirst had drained him of strength, of clarity. His veins ached with a need he could no longer suppress. It was consuming him, hollowing him out. Something dark. It was hungry, and if he didn't feed soon, it would take over, consume him entirely. It was the same for the others. He had seen it in their eyes whenever they crossed paths. They looked haunted. They were all fighting the same inner demon, and they were all losing. The cell was suffocatingly dark, the kind of darkness that wrapped itself around you thick and stifling. The silence was heavy, broken only by the occasional distant drip of water echoing somewhere in the tunnels. Then, through the thick silence, he heard a familiar voice.
Leon? Are you there?
It was Stephanie. She sounded close, her voice muffled through the wall. For a moment, relief flooded through him. At least he wasn't completely alone. He dragged himself closer to the wall where the voice had come from.
Stephanie?
Are you all right? I was worried about you.
I'm managing. What about you? Are you okay?
I'm holding on. But, Leon, have you thought about getting out of here? Do we have any plans? Orders from the tower? Anything that could help us?
Leon's brow furrowed, suspicion creeping in. Why was she asking this now? And why through a wall when the guards could easily be listening?
I'm not sure. We're all in this together. We'll figure something out.
Leon, if you know something, you need to tell me. We're running out of time. They're going to break us. We need a way out. Do you remember anything from before we were captured?
I don't know, Steph. We have to be careful. They're listening. They're always listening.
For a long moment, there was no response. Was it really her? Did she turn on them and was working for the court? His thoughts were spiraling now, and he couldn't hold on to anything solid. Finally, the voice came again.
You're right. I'm sorry. I'm just scared, Leon. We all are.
Leon didn't answer right away. He leaned against the wall, trying to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. But how could he know? How could he be sure? In this place, he couldn't trust his own mind. Time stretched on, and Leon lost track of how long he sat there in the dark. The walls seemed to close in, the silence growing more oppressive. Every sound, every flicker of movement in the dark could be a trick. Could be them. Finally, he spoke again.
You are not Stephanie. She would never admit she was scared even if she was. Nice try.
The voice didn't answer. One night, the four of them were dragged inside a huge dark room one by one. Their footsteps were sluggish and they all felt weak. The room was dimly lit by a single torch. It was the first time they'd all been together since their capture, and the sight of each other was jarring. Leon glanced around at his companions. Javier leaned against a wall, his face tense, hands gripping his head as if trying to keep it from splitting apart. Wade stood silently, his eyes dull, the confidence he once exuded now buried under exhaustion. And Stephanie, pacing anxiously, her movements twitchy, looked like she was barely keeping it together. They were all broken, physically and mentally deteriorated, shadows of their former selves. For a while, no one spoke. The silence was thick, oppressive, the weight of their shared failure hanging in the air. Javier was the first to break it. His voice was bitter, filled with frustration.
So this is it, huh? We lost to the Midnight Fiends. And now what? Does anyone even know if Don Vittorio was caught? Or are we left to rot in this place for nothing?
Caught? Are you serious? Don Vittorio's not caught. He's behind all of this, probably watching us suffer, enjoying every second of it. We're just pawns in his game.
Javier gritted his teeth, his fingers digging into his scalp.
Man, I should have been able to stop that Dracul. I should have been able to...
Stephanie cut him off, her voice cold, almost accusatory.
Why didn't you stop him, Javier? You beat Corse, didn't you? You tore him apart with your powers. Why not do it again?
The guilt in Javier's eyes was unmistakable. He opened his mouth to respond, but a wave of pain crashed through his skull. He winced, gripping his head even tighter.
Ever since Javier used his powers against Corse, he's been suffering. Headaches, pain. He's afraid to use them again. And it's more than just physical. The Raven is taking its toll on him.
Javier tried to interject, but another sharp jolt of pain shot through his mind, silencing him. He leaned against the wall, struggling to keep himself together.
The boss might have a plan. He wouldn't just abandon us. We just have to hold on.
Stephanie shot him a look of disbelief, her eyes flashing with anger.
Hold on? The boss used us. He used us and left us. There's no plan. We're expendable.
Wade's expression darkened, his suspicion growing as he stared at her.
Enough. We need to keep our heads in the game. Whatever's happening, we can't afford to turn on each other. Javier, don't push yourself too hard. Wade, stay focused. And Stephanie, don't lose hope. We're not done yet.
But even as he spoke, Leon's mind drifted elsewhere. Thoughts of his brother, Anthony, crept into his mind. Memories of the time Anthony took the fall for him. Leon should have been the one sent to juvie, but Anthony took his place. Now Leon was in a prison far worse than any mortal could imagine. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was trapped in a nightmare of blood and stone, and there was no escape. Suddenly, the door to the room creaked open again, and in walked the brain warper, flanked by Moroi guards. He smiled, a thin, cruel smile as he surveyed them.
How delightful. All together at last.
Their eyes locked on him with a mixture of fear and hatred.
There's no escape from this prison. The Warden sees and hears everything within these walls. You will spend an eternity here. That is, unless the court decides to end you. Every word you've spoken, Every thought you tried to hide has been laid bare to us. Your little secrets, your pathetic attempts to resist, it was all for nothing. I've been in your minds from the very start, pulling out every piece of information you tried to withhold. You are no longer of any use to us.
The brain warper's smile widened.
And now, it's time.
He nodded to the Moroi guards. Before any of them could react, the guards plunged wooden stakes into their hearts, one by one. Leon felt the sharp, burning pain as the stake pierced his chest, and then, nothing. His body went limp, his limbs paralyzed, but his mind still screamed in fury. They were helpless, unable to move as the Moroi guards drained their blood. Leon could feel the unrelenting hunger that had haunted him for nights, becoming unbearable. But the stake left him powerless, trapped in his own body as life slowly ebbed away, his vision blurred. Just before the darkness claimed him, the Nephilim blood within roared for vengeance. Then, there was nothing, just the cold, silent sleep of the languid state. They were left in darkness, their bodies empty, their minds trapped in eternal stillness.
Cause we want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution. Yeah, we ran out of patience. Boil up with the cold hard hatred. I can feel the vibration in the streets.
A lone Moroi guard stood at his post, his pale face hidden beneath the shadow of his hood. His long fingers gripped his weapon tightly as the alarm bell rang throughout the prison. In the distance, a muffled explosion rattled the walls, shaking the ground beneath him. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, a warning of the chaos that was unfolding somewhere else. Echoes of distant footsteps reverberated through the passages. Another explosion, and then another. The ground trembled once more, and the guard's eyes narrowed beneath his hood. A second guard from House Moroi appeared in the corridor, flanked by 6 grotesque familiars, misshapen and warped. Their yellowed eyes gleamed with hunger as they slunk behind their master.
What was that?
Brother, we have intruders inside the prison. They're moving fast.
How is that possible? The Warden can't find them?
They destroyed the Warden's eye, and its guardian.
The first guard was stunned. The Warden's eye was the prison's most powerful surveillance. For it to be destroyed meant they were dealing with something far beyond the ordinary.
And the specters?
They're using illusions to misdirect the specters. All the corridors are blocked, and the guards are ready. But they took the Widow's Walk.
The first guard stiffened. The Widow's Walk was a death trap, a part of the prison so dangerous even Nosferatu feared to tread its passages. Only the most insane or desperate would dare.
That path leads right past here.
The Warden sent me to reinforce this position. If they are coming for the prisoners in this cell, we are to defend it with our lives.
They'll never pass through the Widow's Walk.
A distant clash echoed through the halls, followed by a monstrous roar that rattled the walls. Both guards exchanged a glance, their fingers tightening on their weapons. Then, with a sudden and violent force, an explosion ripped through the wall beside them, sending dust and debris flying. The air filled with smoke and stone fragments. Out of the haze came the sound of a maddened laughter, a laugh that chilled the blood. Figures emerged from the smoke. Oppenheimer, Akasha and Jolene, battered but defiant. Their eyes glowed with hunger. Before the guards could react, Jolene raised her hand, and the trio vanished into thin air, their forms dissolving into a cascade of shifting illusions.
They're here!
Panic gripped the Moroi sentinels as they fired blindly into the haze, their shots ricocheting off stone walls and disappearing into the swirling darkness. Without warning, one of the guards was lifted off the ground, his feet kicking wildly as though an invisible hand had gripped him by the throat. His eyes bulged with terror, and his screams turned into a sickening gurgle. His head twisted violently with a bone-cracking snap, and his body went limp, dropping lifelessly to the floor. The illusion shattered, revealing Oppenheimer standing amidst the chaos, his eyes alight with madness and hunger. He grinned, blood trickling down his fingers as the crumpled body hit the floor.
Too slow.
He sneered, launching himself at the remaining guards with explosive speed. The other guards barely had time to react before Oppenheimer was on them. His fists crashed into his enemies with brutal strength, breaking bones and shattering ribs. Akasha, meanwhile, moved with deadly grace. She danced between the familiars, her acrobatic agility allowing her to dodge their attacks with fluid precision. Her blades sliced through the air as she cut down the twisted creatures. One by one, they fell, blood splattering the stone floors. She spun and leaped, each movement a deadly flourish. Jolene, taking advantage of the chaos, slipped past the fighting. She crouched before the cell door, her fingers deftly working the lock. A guard lunged at Oppenheimer, desperate to land a blow, but Oppenheimer caught him by the throat and slammed him into the wall with such force that the stone cracked. The guard crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain. Akasha flicked her blade clean of blood as the last of the familiars collapsed at her feet. She turned toward a wounded familiar, struggling to crawl away, leaving a trail of blood behind. It whimpered, eyes wide with terror.
Mercy, please.
The creature begged, trying to pull itself out of reach. Oppenheimer chuckled darkly, stepping over to the familiar.
Mercy? Wrong number. There is no one with that name here.
He placed a heavy boot on the familiar's back, pressing it down until the creature squealed in agony. With a swift, brutal motion, he ended the creature's life, the familiar's body going still as its blood soaked into the stones. At that moment, the lock clicked, and Jolene stood up, swinging the cell door open. Inside, 4 figures lay slumped against the stone walls. Wade, Javier, Stephanie, and Leon.
We have to move quickly. The alarms will bring reinforcements soon.
Jolene reached into her bag, pulling out 4 blood bags.
We need to wake them first. This is powerful stuff. Blood from a vampire strong enough to give them a little boost. Feel it free.
Oppenheimer pulled the stakes from the 4 Nosferatu one by one, their bodies jerking as the wooden shaft slid free. Jolene knelt beside them, offering the blood bags, pressing the first to Wade's lips. His eyes flickered with hunger, and he drank deeply, his strength returning in slow pulses. Javier, Stephanie, and Leon followed, their faces grim but grateful as the powerful blood infused them with a new vitality. They drank in silence, the intensity of their hunger apparent in every swallow. When the bags were empty, they stood, the power of the blood coursing through them, a dark energy that rekindled their dead bodies. The 4 Nosferatu were freed but visibly shaken. They exchanged glances, the weight of their recent torment still heavy in their eyes. Jolene stepped forward, her voice soft and soothing.
We're here to get you out. We're taking you back to the tower's territory. You're safe now.
Leon's eyes flicked toward Oppenheimer and Akasha, still standing by the door, alert and ready for anything. Oppenheimer's eyes narrowed with impatience.
Safe? Not yet. We don't have time to waste. Move.
Javier winced, his hand going to his temple as a sudden headache pulsed through his skull. He staggered, gritting his teeth. The others turned to look at him, and Jolene's expression shifted instantly, recognizing the signs.
Don't use your gifts. You're still low on blood, and trying to push yourselves will only make things worse.
Javier, unwilling to be a burden, glanced toward one of the dead guards near the cell. His eyes landed on a firearm discarded in the chaos. He reached down and grabbed it. Wade followed his example, snatching up another gun, while Leon and Stephanie did the same. With a sharp sound, they cocked their weapons. Akasha, however, had her mind elsewhere. The hunger gnawed at her, worsened by the battle. She recalled the moment Jolene had stopped her from feeding on the Moroi guard earlier, right before they had descended into the underground tunnels.
How did you know you had to stop me from drinking the blood of that guard?
Varus said that the Moroi venom is dangerous to us vampires. There could be poison in their bloods.
Akasha froze, the hunger making her body tremble slightly as she processed Jolene's words. Poison in the blood. It made sense, but it didn't ease the craving inside her. Jolene glanced at Akasha, noticing her struggle. Without missing a beat, she reached into her bag and pulled out the last 2 blood bags she had brought for the mission.
Here,
she said, tossing one to Oppenheimer and the other to Akasha. Oppenheimer caught his bag mid-air, tearing into it with his fangs. The blood flooded his mouth, warm and revitalizing, bringing a surge of strength back into his body. Akasha did the same, drinking deeply, the familiar taste of blood temporarily calming the fire within her. As Akasha finished, Jolene's gaze flicked toward the far wall. A faint shimmer, barely visible, passed through the stone, the ghostly forms of specters drifting through the prison's tunnels searching for them.
We need to move. We go this way.
No, we go that way.
Oppenheimer countered, stepping forward with a grin.
That way take us deeper into the prison. You know that.
Jolene's eyes narrowed. Akasha's mind raced as she caught the subtle tension in Oppenheimer's demeanor. He was hiding something. Her eyes flicked to his, sharp with realization.
What are you not telling us?
Oppenheimer's grin widened, but he didn't answer. He simply turned and began walking in the direction he had pointed. The others, unsure but unwilling to split the group, followed him, the walls seemingly closing in around them as they descended further into the heart of the prison. The corridors of the labyrinth twisted and contorted like the limbs of a spider stretched on before them. The wraiths drifted through the walls like sentinels, but Jolene's illusions kept the group ahead of their enemies. Oppenheimer led the way, but from time to time he got busy planting small, subtle explosives at key points in the stone walls. The distant sounds of the guards echoed down the corridors as they continued, explosions soon following behind them, rumbling through the labyrinth and shaking dust loose from the ceilings. As they continued, they came to a towering wall blocking their path. The stone stretched upward, slick with moisture, with no easy way to climb. The only way forward was up, and the height seemed insurmountable. Akasha stepped forward, assessing the distance. Without a word, she took off in a sprint. She leapt, pushing off a protruding stone, then twisted her body mid-air, catching another narrow ledge with her fingertips. Her movements were graceful, precise, and filled with elegance as she launched herself higher, bounding from one jutting surface to another with the agility of a dancer. Her boots scraped against the damp stone as she performed a final flip, landing on a narrow ledge high above. From this vantage point, she found an old rusted mechanism hidden in the shadows. She pulled a lever with a grunt of effort, and a creaking noise echoed through the tunnel as an old rickety set of metal stairs slowly descended. The stairs clanged into place with a heavy thud, providing a way for the rest of the group to climb. Up there, they finally found a long corridor. At the end stood a single, ominous door. It was heavy and reinforced, crafted specifically to contain powerful vampires. Akasha glanced at the door, narrowing her eyes.
Who's in there?
Oppenheimer's smile widened as he moved to the door.
Give us a hand, Wade.
Of course, boss.
Their combined strength tore it from its frame with a sharp screech of metal and stone. The door slammed to the ground, revealing the darkness beyond. The only light was the faint, flickering glow from the corridor, illuminating a solitary figure inside. A man, his thin frame barely visible through the shadows, was shackled with heavy chains and manacles. His skin was pale, drained of life, his body exsanguinated but not entirely. He had the hollow look of a prisoner long forgotten. His black hair hung messily around his face, and as he raised his head, his eyes gleamed faintly in the low light, with an intellect that had never dulled despite the endless torture.
What a nice family reunion.
Last one.
Jolene's face lit up. She immediately rushed forward, kneeling to work the lock on his chains. Her fingers moving with delicate precision set about freeing him. Akasha remained at the entrance, arms crossed, but even she seemed taken aback.
I was not expecting him.
The Lost One tilted his head, his eyes shifting to her with mild amusement.
Nor was I expecting you.
Why did they leave you with blood? Why didn't they drain you like the rest of us?
The Lost One's gaze shifted to Stephanie, his smile faint but chilling.
Because the Warden enjoys his games. Torture was more fun for him.
Soon, Jolene released the last lock. The chains fell away and the Lost One sagged, his body too weak to stand. Oppenheimer stepped forward, catching him before he could collapse.
You'll be fine,
Oppenheimer said, his tone almost teasing as he helped him to his feet. Jolene embraced him briefly. Akasha gave him a nod, acknowledging him with the respect of kinship, but her eyes remained wary.
Can we go now? Any more surprises?
No, dear sister. Now that our cousin is with us, we have all we came for. Let's move.
It was time to return to the surface and flee before the Warden's forces closed in on them. They turned toward the exit. Akasha led the way, her keen senses guiding them through the maze-like structure. Jolene followed closely. Behind them, Wade, Javier, Stephanie, Leon, and the Lost One moved in silence, still shaken but determined. Oppenheimer kept a watchful eye on the rear, his body coiled like a predator ready to strike. They steadily made their way upward. The prison's layout was a nightmare of spirals and dead ends, but at last, the scent of fresh air grew stronger, a sign they were nearing the exit. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they emerged into a wide, open chamber near the prison's edge. The exit loomed ahead, a massive iron door half open with the faint light of the outside world spilling in. But the sight that greeted them in the chamber was anything but a relief. Corpses littered the floor, twisted in grotesque angles, drained of life and abandoned where they had fallen. The stench of death was overwhelming, a bitter reminder of the prison's horrors. And there, standing, was the Warden. He was a tall figure, draped in a long, tattered cloak that swirled around him like mist. His mere presence seemed to leach the warmth from the room, and a chilling aura of death clung to him like a second skin. Flanking him were two of his most powerful creations, specters that had taken possession of ancient, decayed warriors. On one side stood a towering figure encased in battered samurai armor, the faint glow of its undead spirit flickering within the hollow skeleton. The other, equally imposing, was a long-dead Viking warrior, its rusted chainmail and helmet giving it a fearsome, ghostly visage. These were no ordinary wraiths. They were the Warden's strongest ancient souls, ready to serve him in death. The Warden's lips curled into a thin smile as he regarded them.
All you've done is useless. The island is surrounded. All you managed to accomplish is to deliver yourselves into my hands.
Jolene immediately began weaving an illusion, the air around her shimmering, but the Warden lifted his hand and flicked his wrist with an almost dismissive wave. The illusion unraveled instantly, crumbling into nothing. Jolene's eyes narrowed, frustration flashing across her face. The Warden's voice rose in a guttural chant, a fell incantation that sent a shiver through the air. His hand extended toward her, his fingers twisting in a motion that was both deliberate and vicious. In an instant, a rift tore open behind Jolene, reaching also Javier and Stephanie, who were unlucky nearby. The fabric of reality itself seemed to unravel. The edges of the veil between the material world and the Shadowlands, the realm of the dead, tore apart, and the three were yanked into the void, their forms flickering before they vanished entirely. Jolene's last expression was one of shock as her body was consumed by the dark magic, disappearing into the abyss with a haunting silence. The others stared in horror at the now empty space where their companions had stood.
Now, let's be done with those little illusions,
he said as the two specters stepped forward, weapons drawn, ready to face the remaining group. Jolene, Javier, and Stephanie found themselves thrust into the eerie, colorless world of the Shadowlands, a dimension just beyond the reach of the living. The air felt like an unending fog that carried the whispers of the dead. All around them, the landscape was a twisted reflection of the prison they had just left, but here it was, overrun with the phantoms of the long dead, specters that could never fully manifest in the physical world.
What the hell just happened?
We're on the other side of the veil now. These specters, they couldn't touch us before, but now they can. And we can hurt them too.
As if on cue, dark shapes emerged from the mist. Their forms moved like shadows through the fog. They floated closer, dozens of them, drawn to their presence, hungry for the meager life force the dead bodies of Jolene, Javier, and Stephanie carried with them. Javier clenched his teeth, gripping the firearm he had taken from one of the dead guards. Jolene reached into her bag and pulled out an intricate glove with metallic veins running through it. She slipped it on, the glove crackling to life with arcs of blue electricity dancing around her fingers. A grin spread across her face as the glove began to hum with power.
Well, this is going to be fun.
With a flick of her wrist, Jolene unleashed a bolt of lightning from her gloved hand, the electricity arcing through the air and striking a group of specters. The wraiths disintegrated upon contact, their forms vanishing into the fog with a sizzle and a wail. Jolene laughed, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the fight. Javier, still holding his firearm, opened fire on the approaching specters. The bullets passed through them, dispersing their forms, but the sheer number of enemies quickly became overwhelming. For every specter that fell, 3 more took its place. His magazine quickly ran dry. He threw the empty weapon aside. With no other options, he took a deep breath, knowing he couldn't avoid it any longer. He had to fight with everything he had. His mental powers flared to life, and with a violent sweep of his hand, he sent a wave of force crashing into the spectres, their ghostly forms scattering like leaves in a storm. His body trembled, but Javier didn't stop. With every push of his telekinesis, he sent more of the spectres flying, their ghostly bodies disappearing. But despite their efforts, the spectres were relentless, closing in from all sides, their ethereal forms lashing out and cutting into Jolene and Javier with claws made of shadows. Blood streaked down their bodies from the gashes, pain searing through their minds. Stephanie, watching their struggle, finally had enough. Darkness swirled around her like a living thing, and with a motion of her hand, she raised a towering wall of shadow between them and the approaching ghosts. The spectres slammed into the wall, but it held. For a moment, they were safe.
Stay behind me!
But the spectres began to breach the wall, their ghostly forms seeping through the cracks in the shadow barrier. Stephanie clenched her fist, and the shadows in her hand began to solidify. She shaped them into a sword, long and jagged, and in her other hand, a shield, dark as the void itself. She stepped forward, placing herself between her allies and the spectres, and swung her shadow sword in a wide arc, cutting through the advancing ghosts. To her surprise and pleasure, the sword cleaved through the spectres effortlessly, their ethereal forms torn apart by the dark blade.
Looks like I found their weakness.
Stephanie muttered with a smirk, her confidence surging as she slashed through the enemies. Each strike of her shadow blade reduced the ghosts to nothing, their forms dissipating into the air as she held the line. The three fought in unison, Jolene unleashing arcs of lightning from her glove, Javier sending out waves of telekinetic force, and Stephanie holding the front with her shadow sword and shield. But despite their combined strength, the number of spectres seemed endless, and their energy was waning. Oppenheimer, Akasha, Leon, Wade, and the Lost One squared off against the towering necromancer Warden and his two powerful undead spectres. The Warden stood at the far end of the chamber, one of his hands raised containing the dark spell that kept Jolene, Javier, and Stephanie trapped on the other side of the veil. Despite his intense focus, the Warden still had enough mastery over his magic to assault his enemies in the material realm. The dead samurai charged first, its katana gleaming as it slashed toward Wade, who barely dodged the attack. The sound of an impact rang out as Wade retaliated with a powerful blow, tearing the armor. The Viking swung his sword, nearly taking Leon's head off. He ducked just in time, his speed unmatched. In a flash, he gained distance and opened fire on the Viking. The undead brute, however, barely flinched, its decayed corpse too far gone to feel pain. Akasha, moving with swift grace, buried one of her knives through the Viking's forehead, cracking the bone beneath the rotting flesh. The samurai was relentless, his attacks precise and methodical. Oppenheimer lunged at him using his knife to parry a swing of the katana. With a brutal pull, he ripped apart the sword arm of the samurai. Wade saw an opening and followed with a punch that launched the samurai's head away from the body. The Viking answered Akasha's blow with one of his own, her knife still stuck at his head. Leon felt the raven inside him stir, and as he concentrated, he sensed the speed of the movement of his undead enemy wane. Instead of accelerating himself, he made the Viking move terribly slow. The creature helplessly tried to attack Akasha once more, but to everyone it seemed to move in slow motion. She stepped to the side to avoid the attack, and launched a storm of blows, taking knife after knife from where she hid them, and leaving each one stuck at the Viking like a pincushion. Each attack shattered its body more and more until the Viking fell inert. However, to their dismay, each spectre possessed another nearby corpse, rising again in a new form and drawing their weapons again.
No fun! They keep getting back up!
It's the Warden. He's keeping them alive. As long as he holds the spell, they'll keep possessing new bodies.
Oppenheimer roared, before he and Wade sent another reanimated corpse crashing to the ground. The spectre immediately left the fallen corpse and entered another body on the floor. It rose again, this time in the form of an ancient knight in rusted plate armor.
Enough of this!
Oppenheimer snarled. He turned his focus to the Warden. With a burst of speed, he launched himself at the necromancer. The Warden flicked his wrist, and a blast of necrotic energy slammed into Oppenheimer, sending him crashing into the far wall. The impact shook the room, and for a moment everything seemed to stop. Oppenheimer pushed himself up, blood trickling down his face, a chilling laugh escaping his lips. The Warden raised his hand again, but this time Akasha, using her agility, darted in and struck him across the chest with a sharp knife. The warden staggered but answered with an even more powerful necrotic blast. She was sent away and fell to the ground, barely moving.
You are going back underground and into your cells soon.
Leon, use that last power on the warden.
Leon once again concentrated and felt the dullness spreading against the warden. This time his enemy resisted much better, but Leon's efforts were still enough to slow down the necromancer. Wade flashed around the room, and with the warden's slowed reflexes, he managed to dodge the necrotic blast. Wade used this opportunity to grapple the necromancer instead of punching him.
Boss, he is ready!
Oppenheimer took his chance. With a powerful leap, he closed the distance between them and drove his fist into the warden's chest. The necromancer gasped as the force of the blow crushed his ribcage. Oppenheimer laughed, and with one final vicious strike, he tore the warden's heart from his chest, holding it in his hand as the necromancer's eyes widened in shock.
And here is your Christmas present,
he said as he stuck a knife at the hole in the warden's chest. Before letting go of the knife, Oppenheimer charged it with a powerful energy. Both Wade and Oppenheimer barely had the time to get away before the warden exploded from inside out, the dark magic leaving his ashes in an ethereal wail. The spell binding Jolene, Javier and Stephanie to the other side of the veil was broken. With a sudden shimmer, they reappeared in the material realm, their forms solidifying as they returned. Jolene blinked, disoriented. Javier, bloodied and bruised, gave a shaky nod of recognition, while Stephanie, her shadow sword still in hand, surveyed the scene. The group fled the prison. Behind them, the echoes of pursuers followed them closely. Undead specters and guards determined not to let their prey escape. They reached the coastline where a thick, unnatural fog hung over. A towering, ghostly ship awaited them. The Flying Dutchman. Its black sails rippled like shadowy wings, and its weathered wood creaked ominously as it bobbed on the waves. Abaddon stood at the helm, ready to take command of the ship. Oppenheimer was the first to leap aboard, followed quickly by Akasha, Jolene, and the Lost One. Behind them, Leon, Javier, Wade, and Stephanie scrambled up the gangplank. Just as the last of them boarded, the Dutchman began to sail, the ship cutting through the mist as if it were water itself. The enemies behind them faded into the fog, powerless to follow the ship as it sailed into the Shadowlands, disappearing into the gloom of the realm of the dead. Once aboard, silence fell over the group, the only sound the creaking of the ship. Leon and his companions exchanged wary glances. They had escaped, but the tension between them and Oppenheimer was palpable. They had been left behind before, and the bitterness of that betrayal still lingered.
You used us. You left us to get captured to find the prison.
Yeah, you kept us in the dark about everything. About Don Vittorio, about the whole plan.
What was all this really about?
We were just your pawns in all this.
Oppenheimer's eyes narrowed, the glowing intensity of his gaze returning. He took a threatening step forward, his presence dominating the deck of the ship.
Get something through your skulls. I made you a promise that we'd bring down Don Vittorio, and we did. Don Vittorio is gone, destroyed. You have what you wanted.
Leon clenched his fists, not backing down.
You didn't tell us about the Midnight Fiends, about the real danger. We could have prepared better.
You lost to them because you weren't prepared? Not my problem. One of them, a rat-eating detective, doesn't even drink the blood of humans. The other, a polite, gentle Orlok, and you still lost.
The words cut deep, and they fell silent, their expressions dark. Oppenheimer's voice lowered even further, dripping with disdain.
You truly are a bunch of Carrion Eaters, feeding off the scraps of others, living in the shadows of stronger vampires.
Leon gritted his teeth, but then a smirk crept onto his face.
You know, that's the name we choose for the crew.
He looked over at the others, Wade, Stephanie, and Javier, who all nodded in agreement.
Yeah, the Carrion Eaters. That's who we are now.
Oppenheimer paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the group. Then a slow, sardonic smile crept across his face. He let out a low, almost cruel chuckle. He turned his back to them, his focus returning to the horizon as the Dutchman sailed deeper into the misty expanse of the Shadowlands. The Flying Dutchman drifted silently to a stop at the edge of the Crimson Garden. The air here was thick with the scent of iron, the sky above a dusky red. Every flower, every tree, every vine and blade of grass was colored in deep, rich shades of scarlet, as if the entire garden were nourished by blood. Roses with petals like dark rubies bloomed in every direction, their thorns gleaming under the faint, eerie light. The bark of the trees was slick with a wet sheen that mirrored the crimson hues around them. Droplets of blood hung from the tips of their leaves like morning dew. The garden was alive, pulsating with a dark energy. Oppenheimer, Akasha and Jolene walked together, their eyes absorbing the sinister beauty of the place. Behind them, the Carrion Eaters remained silent, their earlier quarrels forgotten in the face of this otherworldly scene. The Lost One followed also in silence. Finally, they stopped, where a massive blood-red tree stood. The tower of a castle loomed beyond, casting long shadows over the garden. Akasha gave a silent look to her brother and he nodded. She proceeded to guide the Carrion Eaters to the exit. When they were alone, Oppenheimer turned to the Lost One, his brow furrowed, frustration evident in his posture.
You've been quiet since we left the prison. It's time to talk. We brought you back. We risked a lot to get you out of there. Now that we freed you from the King's Court and their tortures, we want your help to destroy them.
You speak of the tower, but I am unwilling to join.
The Lost One said softly, his voice still dry from his long imprisonment. Oppenheimer's jaw clenched, his frustration flaring. He stepped closer to the Lost One, his fists tightening, but Jolene's reaction was immediate. She stared at him in disbelief, her voice rising.
After everything we went through to rescue you? After the King's Court destroyed our house? Why would you refuse to join us in the tower?
Before she could say more, the Lost One raised his hand, interrupting her. His voice was quiet but firm.
Your kindness has not gone unnoticed. I will not join the tower, but I can repay you with the information that can and will destroy the court as it is today.
What? Some kind of weapon?
Even better, a secret buried by one of the ancient evils of our city inside a sarcophagus.